Welcome to the Agency X podcast. Today we are joined by EM from ReturnLogic. She is currently building the partnerships program at ReturnLogic. She's no stranger to e-commerce, having spent the last 5 years in consulting, agency, and other SaaS roles. When not building partnerships, EM can be found cooking, skiing, and producing music.
This episode is sponsored by Gorgias. Gorgias is the #1 e-commerce help desk that lets you manage and respond to messages from your site, social, email, and SMS all in one platform. They have built-in automations to handle common queries like order tracking and save your team time and money. Get a free month by clicking the link in the description and elevate your customer experience today.
You're listening to the Agency X podcast. I'm your host, John Sertikowski, founder and CEO at Avex, a New York City-based e-commerce agency for high-growth D2C brands. As always, I'm joined by our e-commerce strategist, David Anzalone. Our goal is to provide some insight into e-commerce, technology, design, and everything in between. Let us know what you think of today's episode and make sure to visit our website, avexdesigns.com. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm hoping it'll be, a long walk on the beach for me, since it kind of sounds like you're parading me as an eligible bachelorette. Just kidding. Yeah.
And I won't hold skiing against you. I'm a big snowboarder, and there's always that beef between snowboarders and skiers, but it's all good.
As long as I don't have to ride the lift with y'all, I'm cool with it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's always a nightmare. I feel like they should have like a snowboarding and skiing lane or something, because it's two different things, and like someone's facing this way, someone's facing that way, and it's always a mess getting off the lift.
Yeah. You don't coordinate until like right before you get off, and then you crash. So
it's always just like a last minute rush to who's not gonna fall. But I actually went to Utah a few weeks ago for snowboarding, and we got like no snow, so it was awful. But I didn't fall once getting off the lift, so I'm like super proud of myself.
Amazing, because you never want to be that person, because then you have the person behind you that's like awkwardly sitting there waiting, and it's like, do I give you sympathy? Do I make fun of you? So.
And then they got to stop the lift sometimes, and you feel like a real idiot.
Yeah.
Awesome. So e-commerce. That's what we're talking about. I guess I'll start off with a little bit about, what is ReturnLogic for any of our listeners who don't know, and what do you do there, just so that we can kind of set this up and know what we're talking about when it comes to returns.
Of course. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and start with something kind of shocking, which is going to be, don't let the return in our name fool you, because that's sort of the point of entry. But at our core, we're an operations company. We're in the business of helping merchants scale. It's sort of what we excel at. And as far as my role there, I'm, building the partner program. I started here almost a year ago. And what that means is, a little bit of co-marketing, a little bit of business development, and a lot of Zoom calls, which anyone who's in partnerships right now can definitely relate to the Zoom fatigue. But so we're a team of, if I'm going to be honest, e-com nerds. We're aware that no two merchants are alike. We've been in e-com for a while. And where we kind of set ourselves apart is that we have an open API, to just accommodate an infinite number of solutions rather than, forcing merchants to be constrained into predetermined workflows, one-off integrations, things like that.
Very cool. Very cool. And partnerships is something that I feel like has just like, it's been a thing since, there's been SaaS companies, but I feel like every year it's like more and more partnership programs are getting bigger. Like we've even been exploring hiring like someone to manage partnerships as like their only responsibility rather than like some sort of like marketing and shared or sales responsibility. So it's great that you're building that program out. And I feel like when it comes to returns, for a lot of merchants, it's almost like an afterthought. Like, hey, we'll just have our return policy on our site and hope for the best in some cases. And then there's other companies who really focus on returns being a high priority. I'd love to talk a little bit about the difference between creating a positive customer experience versus a positive merchant experience.
Yeah, I really love talking about this because, like I said, we're very much like an operations company. And I feel like you can kind of, merchant experience is just a zhuzhed up way of saying operations because no one wants to talk about
Yeah.
operations. But the merchant experience, the customer experience, they're really two sides of the same coin if you think about it. The returns portal, like, yes, it's super helpful and it's great to reduce friction on the customer side. But if that doesn't carry through to the merchant side, the experience is not going to be great. Easing friction for the shopper, but not the merchant, doesn't really do anything to help the merchant scale. It just, it makes it easier for the customer to return or exchange things. Because if you think about it, there's, you submit your return on a portal, and what happens after that. There's transit, there's dispositioning, there's customer support, there's inventory management, there's accounting, and returns impacts all of these parts of a business that are honestly difficult enough to keep up with without the issue of returns. So that's why I think that an approach to building custom workflows, meaning like completely custom, not like out of the box or predetermined, it can increase visibility for teams, on the merchant side, allowing them to provide the customer with, the best experience with the fewest resources. I actually was thinking about this today. I had a package that I ordered before Christmas just show up today. And it was like, one of those things, there was zero transparency about it. It was just one of those things I was like, all right, I guess it's gone. And it showed up and it was like, okay, I'm happy that it showed up, but I don't think I'm going to order from this place again because, like, what was it, 3 months that it just disappeared into the ether, and it's not a great experience. And then on the other hand, I bought this water drop bottle a little while ago. This is not like a paid sponsorship, and they're not even one of our customers, but they had automated transactional emails throughout the whole experience. And it's like, I don't really care where it is. It's like a water bottle, but they made sure that I knew. And then they followed up a few weeks later asking for feedback. And it was just such a good experience. And I'll definitely be purchasing from them again. So now that there's so many apps, you can have things like robust segmentation, you can have things like automation, and it makes it easy. It just requires, strong strategy and, connectivity between your platforms and your apps.
Awesome. No, that's great. And that you mentioned like integration and making those apps work together. I think that's super important because, the SaaS products that I see doing a really great job are the ones that are extremely focused, right? Obviously ReturnLogic is focused on returns and around customer experience, but I'm sure it integrates well with some other apps out there that you could kind of improve that customer experience across the board. What are some of the like big integrations that you have that customers can use that are like popular on Shopify?
Yeah, so obviously we have some 3PL integrations. We also, because of like our open API, can build pretty much anything. We're branching out more into, the other spaces. So of course, things like Zendesk, Gorgeous, Gladly is really huge for returns because it's really important to, I guess, keeping that transparency and keeping all of this data, centralized in one place. And then, of course, we have some of our merchants who are just building custom connections with things like Klaviyo. I actually talked to a merchant today who has an issue with, troubleshooting versus warranty claims. So if someone, say, submits a request for a warranty claim in the ReturnLogic portal, depending on their return reason, it gets triggered into Klaviyo and they get, a list of questions and troubleshooting to reduce their return rate in that way and have it be, with minimal resources for the customer success team, customer support team. So I would say it's not really a matter of, what integrations we have out of the box. It's more so of like, can a merchant think it? Let's make it happen.
Well, that's pretty cool. And that's a good mentality to have, is to kind of like, well, some of these unknown things are going to come up. And I think it's important to also mention that the software is great, but the merchants that are using it have to have good policies in place and have customer experience be a high priority across the board. Because look, any piece of software is only as good as who's using it and what they're executing with it and what their policies are like and what they're prioritizing. And I'm curious about how merchants can begin to shift their views of returns as more of a vital touch point along the customer journey rather than just a metric that they want to reduce or they want to lower.
Yeah. So I think that for, at least like in the current state of e-commerce, which is, I'm just going to say Shopify. So since Shopify came out, it was almost like returns was, like you said earlier, an afterthought or even like an entirely siloed process in itself. And then there's been a shift. And, as an industry, we're focusing on, returns maybe aren't so bad. It can be an opportunity to save the sale. We can prioritize exchanges. But I feel like there's more that can be done there. I feel like we can figure out, use returns to see what went wrong in what part of the purchase journey and, how can we fix that moving forward. Based on, the data that you can get from returns, if have your returns set up to be, you know, giving you the data that you need, you could see, like, was it maybe a bad ad audience that we had? Was it a defect in the product itself? Did pricing not match expectations? Was it something like fit or color? Did we maybe accidentally or inadvertently send a discount code to someone who's like a serial returner and lose money that way? Because it really happens. I don't
Yeah.
know if you remember. Do you remember a few years ago? I think this was mostly for influencers who like buy things from Nordstrom and then just return them after they wear them. But Nordstrom sent out an email to people who had over a certain amount of returns. And they were like, if you don't stop returning things, you're going to be banned from Nordstrom. And it's just
That's
like,
crazy.
yeah, it was very
Wow.
funny. But when it's done right, the buyer journey, it's more of, I like to think of it as a circle of life instead of a straight line, because the goal isn't get the credit card information and make that first sale. It's getting that repeat purchase, getting that
Hmm.
brand evangelist almost. And not only can returns create an opportunity for a bespoke shopping experience, so that gorgeous or Zendesk integration, allowing for, things like upsells and personalization, even in the return. But easing friction on the shopper side and the merchant side increase, I guess, a likelihood for the next purchase. So it's almost like, okay, how do we take returns out of its own space and realize that it can impact so many different points of the customer journey, and
Hmm.
points of the customer journey can also impact return rate.
No, that's great. And again, that's something that the merchants need to be able to focus on and make sure that there's software that are provided outside of just putting some communications on their site and then making it a difficult process for the customer. Like for me personally, I want I hate returning things. There's so much stuff that I
Me
bought
too.
where I've just I'll just keep it rather than fill out the paper and send it back. I think the biggest thing for me is just like packaging it up and bringing it to the post office. If there was a way to solve that, then I would return more things. But I guess that's, impossible for software to solve.
Yeah, when there's a
Um,
software where a guy comes to my house and wraps it up nicely and takes it to the
yeah.
post office, because I'm with you. Yeah, I'm like, people ask me all the time. They're like, "Oh, what do you think about returns?" And I just like look at the pile of, things I bought online that I meant to return and just never did.
Yeah, but when I do, I'm a big fan of this, and I don't know if there's software out, if it's ReturnLogic, or if it relates to this anyway. But I used to not do this, and uh, my wife was always just like, why don't you just order a few of them and try on what fits and then return? And I
Fitting
was just
room
like,
purchases.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, and I was so against that. But now whenever I buy sneakers from like a place that I maybe, if it's like Nike or something, or like Converse, I know what my size is. But if it's like a brand I haven't used before, I'll order like 2 or 3 pairs of pants of the same thing, or like 2, 3 pairs of sneakers, and I'll just return what doesn't fit or doesn't look good. Which I'm sure has to be a big problem for brands. I'm sure that so many people are doing that. And I don't know, how do you limit something like that?
I think that probably the biggest way that you can, because it's like a very popular thing. I even was shopping a few months ago and I saw this thing that was like, if you have any questions, reach out to us. Don't order a bunch of things in the same size or a different size. And I think that, getting that, kind of playing the long game, having a long strategy where, you don't want someone to just buy from you once. You want someone to
Mm-hmm.
buy from you again and again. And maybe that means having to deal with that initial fitting room purchase and dealing with that return, but taking stock of why it's being returned, what
Yeah.
was wrong with it, so that not only can you be more descriptive in your PDP, or like maybe have better images, because sometimes you get something and the color's off. So anything like that, to when they come back, they won't have to do that again, because they'll know how things fit. They'll have better guidance on the website. It's kind of, not looking at returns as something to be defensive about, but,
Mm.
once again, just another touch point.
I'd be interested in even creating some sort of automation for identifying someone who is doing that, and not treating it as like a bad thing. Like, say someone who ordered two of everything, and it's like, okay, there's two different sizes. Clearly there might be a way to be able to put them in a certain funnel or flow and then communicate with them in a way. Maybe it's like, you could, even if it's not saying to use it as a negative, but like use it as a positive. How can we use that information to be able to communicate with them a bit differently, because they're buying a bit differently than someone else? So I think there's ways to be able to flip that, which could be really interesting. But I think it's going to be a while before they solve someone coming to your house and just packaging up your stuff for you. But maybe that's a good thing. So when it comes to the data that we're collecting, and like, I know that we always want to collect data, find out who customers are, personalize the experience, both when it's on site or via email or SMS or something. But how can returns data inform strategies outside of returns policies? Because we spoke about, like, of course, providing a better customer experience for returns, or benefits to the merchant that would mean a long-term customer. But how can that information, how can that data help things outside of returns, maybe in other aspects of customer experience or somewhere else in their business?
Yeah, so this ties into something I'm very passionate about, coming from the agency world, which is CRO,
Mm.
conversion rate optimization, one of my favorite topics. And I think that it all comes down to, first party data. With all the changes in iOS and privacy and just acquisition costs skyrocketing, being able to take whatever data you have, it basically turns you into, like, have you ever seen There Will Be Blood?
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Plainfield, you're like, I'm a data man, without like the murder and stuff. But it's true, because it's like, okay, we won't have access to, things we might have had before. But what if we look at what we own, basically like our owned data? I guess for a while it was like owned channels was so important with Klaviyo and email. And now it's almost like, okay, what kind of owned data do we have? And then how can we make that work for us? Returns is one such source of that, especially if you can collect primary and secondary returns data, which I think can be really helpful in, CRO strategy, ad strategy, even, building your brand. Of course, like, returns is not the only thing, but it can be a really important point there. For example, once again, if, you're seeing patterns in your returns and things like, colors off, sizing's off, you can make changes, in the PDP, in your ad
Mm-hmm.
strategy. Just being able to use any first party data that you can have access to, whether it's, returns, whether it's reviews, whether it's whatever. If you have access to those analytics, you should absolutely use them. And I think that returns is, something that's maybe overlooked in this way because, it's kind of like returns is over here. No one wants to deal with it. But instead, it's like you kind of shift your perception of it and see, like, do you know what we don't like is returns? How do we
Yeah.
keep it from happening? Leverage our existing returns to figure out what we can fix. And also be aware that, it's never going to go away completely.
Yeah, I love that approach, especially about using that data to maybe change things on the PDP. For example, it's like, and it might not even be a variant, it might be in the description, or it might be like, hey, look, people are returning things because this color isn't as accurate. Maybe we need to take different photos of something, or maybe we need to take more detailed shots. That will, of course, increase conversions, like you said, but also reduce the return. So it's not even about the customer experience of the return. It could be, how can we use this information to improve the customer experience before they even make a purchase? Whether it's altering the policies or altering the PDP or things on the homepage or whatever it may be, you could grab a lot of data from there. And data is super important. We've been hyper focused on, I hate using hyper focused. I don't know. It's like a trendy buzzword and I never use it. I don't
I
know
feel
why
like I need
did.
to take a drink every time someone
Yeah.
says,
That might be the first time
hyper-focused,
I've used it this year. And I'm
headless.
just
Yeah.
like, oh God. Okay. But yeah, that's why we've been very, very much into conversion rate optimization over the past year, especially working with dynamic yield. We just started a program called GrowthX, which is dedicated to only CRO. And it's a really neat program. But what I like about dynamic yield is that you could actually, because you have an API, there's likely ways that you could A/B test certain things with returns on your store because there's an API there. So like a lot of people think about like conversion rate optimization as it relates to like A/B and multivariate testing, and you're testing user experience. But there might be a lot of ways to test things that have to do with returns, whether it's policies or functionality or treating returns a little bit differently and segmenting them a bit and seeing what works and what doesn't. So some really interesting things there. And I never really even thought about like testing or like using returns to optimize for conversions, but that's a really unique way of looking at it. I like that a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, it's like like a very rare case of, you have a hammer, everything's a nail. It's like a rare case of that, like actually working. But one of the most interesting things that I think it could be used for is like optimizing pricing.
Mm.
In that, like, say you pay like $90 for a shirt and it has a really high return rate, and the reasons for it being returned are like, it wasn't what I thought it was, or like, no reason. And you could look at it as like, okay, we're selling this shirt for $90 and it has X amount return rate. And what if we, lowered it to $70 and we lower the return rate? And even though we're selling the shirt for way less money, we're still making more of a profit because we're not getting that churn and the return shipping and restocking and things like that. So it's almost like, what problems are you having? And one of the first places you should be looking is, returns and what's available as far as data there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So ReturnLogic, is it strictly for Shopify Plus, or is it for other e-commerce platforms as well?
Yeah, so we are in the process of becoming platform agnostic, which is, of course, very exciting. So right now we're only Shopify, but if someone who's not on Shopify wants to use us, we can do like a custom thing because of our API.
Awesome. I know we mentioned headless as a buzzword before, but if someone is like on a headless infrastructure, I'm assuming that they could utilize the API to be able to use ReturnLogic, correct?
Yeah. So we're in the process of opening up all of our endpoints, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, I'm not a technical person, so that's about where my knowledge stops. But I know that we've been talking about how we can be not a solution, but the best, most robust solution, almost like an operating system for returns.
Very cool. And that's okay. I just do a good job at pretending I know about the technology side, but we just can't tell anyone because I'm
Yeah.
supposed to know everything.
I think if you have like a certain affect about it, people will just accept it. They won't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. You just got to deliver it right.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, he knows what he's talking about. No, yeah. I kind of know a little bit, but enough.
I know. Yeah, I know. That's exactly it. I know enough. What is it? Plato was like, yeah, real knowledge is knowing that you know nothing. So there we go.
This is true. This is true. Admit what you don't know. And honestly, like when it comes to returns, like all I know is the customer side. Like I don't know the merchant side as much, even though like all of our merchants do returns and but our team executes on those. And it's usually there's some sort of policy or something in place. We don't really influence that so much, but we do try to advise. I will say that there's been like two things that some of our merchants really push back on when we advise. It's like, we have one merchant, I won't say who it is, but they're pretty popular. I went to buy something from their store and the amount of shipping, the cost of shipping was outrageous. And I was like, I didn't buy it. I didn't even buy it because the shipping was so high. And we've advised a lot of merchants like, hey, you got to reduce your shipping, or if you just work it into the cost, you'll probably increase conversions. And there's been hard stances on like, no, we can't lose money on shipping. And then the same thing with returns. We've advised on like better return policies or using different tools. And there's always a little bit of like, it's like a sensitive topic for some reason. I don't know if they just don't want to pay attention to it or they're afraid they're going to lose money. But it's because that's like the operation side, right? It's kind of like the boring side. But we don't get to
merchant
influence it
experience.
as much.
It's funny. Our CEO,
like
our CEO says something that makes me like crack up every time I think about it, especially because we all do a lot of shopping online, which is if the return policy is really difficult and there's a lot of friction, like 9 times out of 10, it was written by the CFO.
Yeah. That usually does happen because it's like an operations thing. It's a money thing.
Yeah. When really it should be considered part of, the brand.
Yes. Yeah, of course. It should be. When you're thinking about customer experience and branding in general, you have to look at everything. Like an omni-channel experience means providing a great experience across all different channels. And that part of that is returns too. Speaking of merchant experience, I've never heard that term. Is that something that you coined or someone else coined? Because I've never heard it.
Yeah, it's something that I actually was on a conversation with an agency and they were like, oh, so, like the way the merchant experiences it as opposed to the way the customer experiences it. And I was like, yes, I'm going to start using the term merchant experience instead of operations because it sounds more engaging. Because, if you think about it, like
it does.
On the merchant side, there's so much. Even if you're using like a 3PL, that's still part of your process. And even if you don't have your own warehouse team, there's still all that functionality that happens. And it's not just, the box magically appears at your residence when you order something online. There's a whole team of people that have to make it happen. And there needs to be harmony between, what the customer is experiencing and, what the merchant's experiencing. It's kind of like the DAO. You need to have both, both sides in order to have a positive experience. Because, you can have something that's completely customer focused, but it may not help you scale. So it's just, on that merchant side, it's sort of like, merchants should all be thinking about, processes and customizations that they can be putting in place to not only make their, I guess, streamline operations is a super boring way to put it, but, streamline operations to make sure that the customer is having a good experience as well.
Yeah. And that they're focusing on their brand, because the less time you're focusing on your brand and more time on, those processes, systems, operations, super important. But, they want to focus on growing their brand and, automating some other things or not having to worry about certain technologies and things like that. But merchant experience, I love that term. I'm going to use it with some of our clients during sales calls. I think it's great, especially since for agencies, like we're always talking about customer experience, but we're serving our clients, right? Same thing with SaaS products, right? Your key demographic are merchants. So talking about merchant experience and improving, whether it's a back-end CMS or a tool that they're using, making their jobs easier, they're going to see value in that. And that's going to trickle down, like you said, to the customers, because they could provide a better customer experience. They could focus more on their brand. And it has like that kind of trickle down effect. But I'm definitely going to steal that term. If I use it publicly, I'll give you credit.
Yeah,
but,
trademark.
Privately, what you won't know won't hurt you.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I mean, I think we covered a lot today. Did you have anything that you wanted to touch on that we didn't?
I mean, I guess there's just sort of like a general advice for merchants who are listening. And I'm actually gonna, I guess, like put myself on blast here and everyone
All right.
else who works in SaaS sales, which is like, I know with like the appification of e-commerce and, it's my job to get people on my platform. But I think
Of
that
course.
a lot of merchants don't really think about, implementing new tech in the context of their brand story. I think that, in order to be successful, now that once again, the acquisition costs are so high and there's so much competition, if you're going to implement new tech, like ReturnLogic, you need to think of it in the context of the overall story that you're trying to tell and the strategy that comes from that story. And it's probably one of the most important things when, doing something new is, keeping the customer journey in mind and how it intertwines with brand story. And if those two are in conflict, then there's not it's not going to work.
Yeah, for sure. Just overall, focus on what works for your brand, your business, and just be authentic about everything that you do. Even when you're choosing technology, make sure it's right for your business and that it's going to improve customer experience.
Yeah, and merchant experience.
And merchant experience. I can't forget about that. Like I have to shift my thinking into merchant. Now
Yeah.
that's going to be the new buzzword.
Yeah, you
Everyone's
said
gonna get
you're
sick
going to
of
start
it.
using it. You can't even come
I
on.
am. I have to. Well, at least I'll be one of the first.
Yeah.
All right. Well, EM, thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.